Alright, so this is a mock shooting for Operator, which is going to be a new YouTube channel that I'm launching. Basically what we're going to be getting into is the idea of taking apart Nerf guns, Nerf blasters, and figuring out how to take them apart. Once we get them apart, how do they work? In the process of taking Nerf blasters apart, it's very common that there are things you can break, things you can lose, things you can mess up when putting it back together. So the basic idea of this channel is going to be to help you as a modder, or even if it's just a broken part that you're trying to fix, or it's not operating properly, or someone's jammed it, whatever it may be. This is going to be a channel where you can come to and figure out, first of all, how it works, and then figure out what may not be working with your own blaster, or how to improve on the workings of your own. That's what we hope to accomplish through this channel. So, getting into episode 1, we're going to be tackling the Strongarm. Now, the Strongarm is by far one of the most iconic blasters of this new era. The Maverick, in my opinion, was iconic for the original series of Nerf, back when Nerf was first really starting to pick up and gain steam when I was a kid. Now, the Strongarm is the equivalent of that. It is a 6-round, cylinder-style, spring-powered blaster. So, getting into the workings of it, how it works, we're going to rip it apart, figure out how it works, put it back together, and over the course of that, I'm just going to tell you some things to watch out for. Alright? So, let's get into that. Okay, so the first thing you're going to need is a screwdriver. Now, the style of screwdriver that I use is one wherein you can actually have a bunch of little bits in the end, and this is actually just a magnetic disconnect. This has helped a lot because Nerf screws are notoriously small. So you're going to need something smaller on the screwdriver scale. So first thing we're going to look at here is the outer screws. So a way to store your screws, especially for Nerf blasters, I sometimes use a magnet and I stick them all in there. People I've seen use a strip of tape and they stick the screws on individually as they go through. Sometimes, especially now that I'm very used to it, I actually just use a Tic Tac container and I mark the name of the Nerf blaster that I'm pulling apart on the edge of the Tic Tac and then fill it up with the parts that I want to keep safe. Regardless, what you're going to want is some container or something to keep the smaller pieces from getting lost, because losing pieces is one of the #1 things that makes pulling apart Nerf blasters frustrating. So, getting into it, wherever you start, move in a clockwise or counterclockwise rotation. So I typically go counterclockwise, starting either at the top right corner or close to the trigger. So, as you pull these screws out of your Strongarm, you're going to see that, or notice, that a lot of them are actually the same size. Now this is common in Nerf, and these screws are interchangeable. So if you happen to mix them up, that is completely okay because they are all the same size. However, having said that, there are a few places where they are not. And these are what we're going to have to watch for. Typically, these places are at high stress points for the blaster. So, in bigger blasters like Recons or Raiders, stuff like that, the rear area, like right here, you can see right here on the blaster, this rear area will typically have longer screws. I've also seen them in some flywheel systems for the front or the back. There can be longer screws. So typically the other point is in the rails sometimes. So you can see kind of up here in this area, this is a rail. Sometimes in the rail area, they can have longer screws. Now, for us, thankfully, the Strongarm does not. All of the screws in the Strongarm are the same, so it does not matter what order you pull them off or what order you put them back on. All right, now we've removed all the screws from all the way around here. So you can see there was screws here, 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 and here, 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 and here. Yeah. You get it. They're all over the place. Sometimes, and on some of the demolish, what is it? I can't remember it now. But there's a gun that's a blaster's very similar to a Strongarm, and that actually has a screw hidden behind this. So right in this compartment area here, there's actually another screw. This model of Strongarm does not have that, and so we do not need to worry about it. So the first thing, sorry I'm getting ahead of myself, first thing we remove is this cover on the top. We cannot remove this second part because it is actually attached to a return spring inside the blaster. So take this off, set it aside, and we'll come back to that later. Now this is the other tricky part. Pulling the blaster cover off is, again, another place where you lose pieces because there are loaded springs inside of the blaster. So one spring to watch out for, at the back here, this orange catch is loaded on a spring, and that spring is not held down to anything, so when you pull it up, that spring wants to shoot out. Another area, not as common, but it does happen, is on the trigger. There's actually a spring pushing the trigger back. That spring as well can spring out, and you can lose that. So avoid doing both of those things. So it can help if you have a flathead screwdriver. I've noticed that helps sometimes with pulling apart blasters. But you just want to be careful. Another spring that can fly out is actually, alright, here's your cover there. Another spring that can actually come off is right in here. This little rail catch has a little loaded spring in it. They are outmoding them, I've noticed, but you gotta watch for that. That is one of the most commonly lost springs, especially for people who are inexperienced in taking this apart. So you can see there's that spring there. You want to watch that. And then there's the catch, or the spring on the trigger. So there is one screw holding the trigger on. It's a little different in its makeup, so it's easy to distinguish from the other ones. So there's not going to be any trouble with you accidentally, losing it or mistaking it for a different one. Now, this is your main housing right in here. So if you can see that, this is your plunger system right here, your rotator system, and all of this is connected. There's a spring here, and a catch spring here. This spring you're not really worried about losing. This one is the one that very often gets lost. So this here, we can pull this orange cover off the front just so it doesn't fall out, and then we can actually pull the whole cylinder out. The cylinder, this part removes. It's pretty self-explanatory there. And then you've got the actual housing here, and that all comes out too. So, and then this is your plunger, your spring is in there, and this is the catch for the rotator, so as it rotates, this locks into place and helps as an internal lock. So you can see all of that in there. So very commonly, if you're having problems, a lot of problems happen with catches. So you can see up here, this catch, something breaks because this whole component here is plastic. Something in there can break or fall off. If you're missing a spring here, this spring is very important. It helps to seal so that when the gun or the blaster shoots its dart, this makes sure that is sealed tight so that air is able to flow through easily. If that spring is gone, you don't get as tight of a seal, and then what ends up happening is you lose a lot of FPS, a lot of firing power. So another thing that can happen is that over here, this rotator can break or jam. And when that happens, here we go. When that happens, then it doesn't rotate all the way, and so you end up just shooting halfway into one cylinder, halfway into another, and it doesn't work. These are just some common problems. I'm basically just trying to give you a shot of what it looks like here, so that if anything is different on yours, you can kind of tell why. So one thing I do need to note, the air restrictor on mine was removed. Now, the air restrictor is something I can talk about in a later video or a different video. I'll shoot a link in the description below. But I've removed the air restrictor, so typically there is an air restrictor here. But other than that, this gun is completely the same. So, and that's pulling it apart. Now we just got to put it all back together in the exact reverse order that we pulled it apart. So the housing always goes back in first. And it'll slide it into place. An easy way to tell if you've got it slid in correctly is if this is all flush. Because if this is flush, then you're sitting right. And it'll just feel right when it clips in. So I'm going a little bit out of order, but I don't like this trigger just sitting off here like this. So another very common problem is stripping screws. Now, there's a lot of different ways to avoid stripping screws. The personal way that I have found to avoid stripping screws on a regular basis is the slight left turn and then go right. So if you turn it to the left, the screw to the left, after you've got it seated, until it clicks, that means that the threads have locked into place. So you turn it to the left until it falls into place, then you turn it back to the right. So, oh boy. Now putting it back together, again, those points where I really, stress about losing, this spring right here and this spring right here are the spots where you are going to literally hate everything. So I really can't get it in the shot, but there's a little nub right there, and that's where this spring actually rests, is right on top of that. So you actually pull this up a little bit and you slip it underneath. It is incredibly frustrating. I don't really know why Nerf designed this the way that they did, or I guess Hasbro, who owns Nerf, designed it the way they did, or why they haven't changed the design so that the spring housing is a little bit, better. Anyway, it's incredibly hard. I had to pause it because it was taking so long to get it back in there. So that is really probably the most annoying part of pulling apart this gun and putting it back together, is that spring housing right there that I think I just... Did I mess it up again? No, it's there. Why is it not resting? It wants to launch out. Oh my gosh. Okay. I got that spring back in. Like I said, it is incredibly annoying. Now, when you're putting the cover back on, it's something to watch out for is that stuff may not be completely seated correctly or sitting there. So it helps just kind of jostle stuff around a little bit if you need to. But I like to find a spot that's sealed and then just work my way over until I'm able to get to a point that isn't sealed. So, now we're having a problem with this one. What's going on here? It's like the spring housing isn't sitting right. See, and this is exactly why we have videos like this. Because taking these things apart and putting them back together is really, really hard. The first few times that you do it, and even later on, especially like trying to explain what's going on, I'm having a difficult time focusing on explaining it and putting it together. it looks like there's something. There we go. There's just a little something that was sitting out. So now you've got the cover back on, and it's just popping the screws back in. So put it back on, turn to the left to hear that click, and then you can go right on in and just do that. Remember, the screws are not specific to any, like, has to be in one location, so you can literally just clip it on in anywhere. So I really hope that this video in some way was helpful, because I think that's the goal of our channel, is to provide an area where give very slow step-by-step instructions so that you can have an area where you know, if you have questions or problems or you're trying to figure stuff out, you can do that. Because I think one of the things that really slowed me down for a long time with, getting involved with Nerf and Nerf guns and all that was how easily they broke or jammed if you didn't know how to operate them correctly. The Maverick was one of the only ones that really worked, and even then it didn't really work. So anyway, I just hope that this provides an area where you can watch and learn, and honestly, if you don't want to finish this video out, I completely understand. I'm just going to keep putting this gun together and talking about Nerf stuff, because I really want to get this back together before I cut film. So this is the first pilot episode of this. We're going to experiment with some new stuff, try to figure out what works, what doesn't work. Hopefully we can shoot sometime in the fall and winter when it's not so stinking hot out here in this garage. But really looking forward to what we have coming up on the agenda, and hoping that you guys will come back and watch more videos, and this will be really helpful. So there you go. The Nerf Strongarm. Thanks for watching.